Wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away. Wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today. Calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. 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 Wonderful story of love.
All right. So verses 4 and 5 of Leviticus 10, Moses called also to Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your relatives away from the front of the sanctuary to the outside of the camp." So they came forward, carried them still in their tunics to the outside of the camp, as Moses had said. So these relatives come in and they're instructed, get them outside the camp. What is the significance of outside the camp? That's a phrase that appears more than one time in the scriptures. There's always this common thread. Unclean things are moved outside the camp. And that is also why Jesus was crucified outside the city. So that's what he's saying. Now, why does it mention specifically that they were still in their tunics? Okay, something to do with their work as priests. These clothes, the clothes that they were wearing, and the clothes that the priest wore when they entered into the tabernacle to offer sacrifices, were very specific clothes that God had prescribed and given them to be worn, clothes that had to be treated in a particular way. If those clothes became unclean, they had to be replaced, gotten rid of. And so the point seems to be to me, by making us aware that they were still in their tunics, is to remind us these were priests. Now, there's two things that you can talk about in connection with that. First off, I'll start with the one that I think is more substantive, and then I'll talk about the one that I think is more common. They were priests. What were priests expected to be as they engaged in their service? Holy, which is a word that simply means what? Pure, clean. They were to be holy. The New Testament talks about us as priests and says that we are offering up spiritual sacrifices to God. If the priests are to be holy, and these two priests did something unholy, and because they did something unholy, they were judged, then that tells me that in my life, as I function as a priest offering up spiritual sacrifices to God, I need to do what? I need to be holy, even in the things that some people may think seem unimportant, like where the fire comes from. I mean, after all, fire is fire, right? No. There was authorized fire, there was unauthorized fire. There are authorized sacrifices, there are unauthorized sacrifices. The sacrifices were very specific as well, too. What animals, what age the animals, the health of the animals, the way in which they were butchered, the parts that went onto the altar, all that was specified. What if they had altered the sacrifice? Instead of bringing a bullock or a goat, they brought some other thing. Would that be pleasing to God? No, it mattered. All of it mattered. And so that's part of what we're being told. Okay, these are priests, and they were expected to do what God said and do it the way God said. And when they didn't do what God said and do it the way God said, they were judged. We are priests. We are expected to do what God says and do it how God says. If we don't do what God says and how God says it, what should we expect? We'll be judged. Okay, there's one, and that's the more substantive part of it. The second one is something that's much more common to the way we think. If the priest were so judged, what about the common man? There is it's not directly connected to this. Understand that's, I'm not saying that, but there is a echo of this idea in the New Testament when it talks about men who are serving as elders who are embroiled in sin and who do not repent. It says to do what? You're supposed to correct them in the presence of everyone so that all will be fearful of sinning. The idea being, if an overseer who has a measure of authority given to him, if an overseer is not at liberty to do what he wants to do and is corrected for doing wrong things, what should I understand? Same thing is true for me. I should do the right thing, and if I don't do the right thing, I'm going to be corrected. Put this in a household. If you live in a household where dad and mom do things wrong and then excuse themselves because they're dad and mom, what eventually happens with the children? They see no point in following rules. And outside of the house especially, they don't respect authority because they are seeing their authority not respect authority. If mom and dad speak evil of the government, speak evil of the police force, what happens with kids? They take the same attitudes with them. If, however, mom and dad are held to a standard, the child says, look, dad can't even get away with this, then I certainly should. And there is an aspect of that we need to understand. It also, in a very different way, because Jesus never sinned and didn't need to be corrected, but the fact that he came and lived under the law, subjected himself to the law, respected the authorities, respected his father and his mother. He's the creator of all things. By nature, he was greater than all of these things that he accepted a subjection to. If he is subjected to these things while he is on the earth, guess who else is? Me. And it also teaches us that that kind of accountability doesn't mean that you are not important or valuable. It's not an ordinal, and we start thinking about authority. If you get important enough, then the rules don't apply to you. You can't get more important than God with us, and the rules applied to him. And so if they apply to the Lord, if they applied to the priest, if they apply to the high priest, if they apply to all of us. If you're going to go in and approach God and worship God and try to be in fellowship with the holy God, then you need to do what is necessary in order to maintain that fellowship. And again, keep in mind, that's really what this book is all about, is how can this group of people who have sinned and who are ashamed and afraid to be in the presence of God, how are they going to be able to enter into the tabernacle where God dwells? And he's unfolding, and here's one of the ways that you can approach God without fear and confidence is by approaching him respectfully, by honoring him and glorifying him through the things that you do and say. That is extremely important. 6 and 7, Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, so that you may not die, and that he may not become wrathful against all the congregation. But your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, shall bewail the burning which the Lord has brought about. You shall not even go out from the doorway of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For the Lord's anointing oil is upon you." So they did according to the word of Moses. So what this is simply about is Aaron and the remaining sons are told what? You have a job to do. Yes, Nadab and Abihu have died. Notice that the father and the brothers not engaged to carry him outside the camp, but other relatives are brought in to do that. They're told to do what? Stay there and do your job. And even beyond that, they said what? There's to be no public mourning. Don't uncover your head. Don't rip your garments. Don't do any of the things showing grief. If you do that, if you leave the tent of meeting, if you shirk your responsibilities, you die too. And ultimately, he even extends it to what? Did you notice that in about halfway through verse 6? Maybe not quite halfway. Yeah, I guess it is. You not become wrathful against all the congregation. Don't lead everyone else into that kind of the thing. If you do these things, it's going to affect everyone. So don't do those things, and it reinforces what's already been established. Priest doesn't belong to himself. Priest belongs to God. Again, we're priests, right? And we are told in the New Testament, you have been bought with a price. Therefore, do what? Glorify God in your body. It's very important that we realize that we're the priests in this story. What happens when someone is judged? Now, we don't have to celebrate it. He's certainly not telling them to celebrate it, is he? But he's saying don't mourn the judgment of God because it's righteous. And he's saying don't stop fulfilling your obligations in the kingdom because of God's righteous judgment. Continue to be faithful, continue to do what you're supposed to do, continue to carry out your service, and God's wrath will be abated. How do we not fear God? Do what is right. That goes all the way back to where? Genesis 4. Cain and Abel. One sacrifice is acceptable, one sacrifice is not. The brother that offered the sacrifice that was not acceptable got angry and upset, and he was told by God, if you do what is right, will not your countenance be lifted up? The response is to do what is right. When you do what is right, you don't have to fear the Lord. When you do what is right, you're in fellowship with God. When you do what is right, you're at peace. When you don't, this is what happens. And when it happens, it's just. Learn how to accept the righteous judgment of God. Yes, sir. Right. Right. And by the way, yeah, it doesn't mean that they never mourned his loss. Yes. Or their loss.
When he told him, I want to follow you, but I got to go bury my father, and all this other he said, let the dead bury the dead.
Right.
It's more things than that. I kind of get that out of this.
I think that's a fair connection. All right, verses 8 through 11, instruction regarding sobriety and service. This is important stuff. The Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the tent of meeting, so that you may not die." It's a perpetual statute throughout your generations, so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane. By the way, there's a lot of people who read this differently than I do. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that up front. Verse 10 is important. I don't think it's saying don't drink so that you have good judgment. I think it's saying don't drink so that you are discerning between what is holy and what is not. So as to make a distinction between what is holy and what is not. Just like they didn't eat things with a cloven hoof. They were making a distinction between what was unholy and what was holy. In this case, he says, you don't drink alcohol, you don't drink anything fermented, and then come into the presence of God and engage in service to God, lest you die. Now, what had just happened? Two people had gone into the presence of God, exercised poor judgment, not discerned between good and evil, and died. So he says, look, just understand, when you are engaged in service to me, there is an aspect between what is clean and what is unclean, what is righteous and what is unrighteous. You have to choose what is clean and do what is right. If you don't, you will die. You need to make the distinction between holy and profane, between the unclean and the clean, and so as to teach the sons of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them through Moses. Our choices to do right things teach other people about God and God's commandments. One of the most common complaints you hear about unbelievers against the church. Anybody want to hazard a guess what it is? Okay, legalistic. We can't have fun. It's full of hypocrites. That's the one you hear. You know why they say it's full of hypocrites? Because people aren't doing this. People aren't discerning between what is holy and unholy and doing what is holy and showing through their behavior what is holy, so that there is a consistency both in what we say and in what we do. Yes, sir.
Paul, when he was talking about when you come together to partake of the Lord's Supper, some of you are going ahead and get drunk, some of you are eating and not discern. And he said, examine it wasn't about eating in the church building. It was talking about when he said examine themselves. Not that they were sin. He was talking about examining if they was doing this the way the Lord ordained it, the way we see it here. That when they was talking about examine yourself, examine what are you doing? From my understanding of that scripture, I know a lot of people
Right.
do other things, but when you look at it, he said, some of you are going ahead and eating and drinking, not waiting on others. You're profound, this is me now. It's similar to this in a sense because they did not look at that as a holy thing. They seen that as a common meal and it was doing things. When he said even some of them was asleep because of that meaning death, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken. Same way these men died for not holding this in a holy and high manner, same way they were in the first century.
Worship is not common. And we cannot approach it as if it is common and it doesn't matter. I know that's not popular today. What's popular today is be as casual as possible and do whatever you want to do, and you ought to just be glad I'm here. He said, no, no, no. When you approach God, when you're engaged with God, when you're in the presence of God, when you're offering sacrifice to God, you discern between what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil, and you do what is right. And then he says the effect of that goes beyond the worship. It teaches others about God. And to talk about the instruction of the church at Corinth, he talked to them about their use of spiritual gifts in the assembly. And the fact when they abused that, when they didn't honor the purpose and use those gifts for the things that God gave them for, and created confusion and disorder in the assembly, then the outsider comes in and he thinks these people have lost their mind. But instead, if we do things decently in order, then the outsider comes in and says, what? Surely God is among them. The process by which we engage in these things matters. And it matters beyond just ourselves. I don't just do it because I don't want to have fire fall from heaven and consume me. I do it also because I want to project to others how important God is, how holy God is, how righteous God is, and how much we need to honor him. And the language of the Bible is to honor him as God. It doesn't just say honor God, it says honor him as God. Understand that by doing these things, you show him the respect that the divine deserves. We need to not treat God as common. We need to not treat God as something that's profane. Instead, we treat God as something that is holy and divine. And it makes a significant impact on the way the world looks at God. Then there's some instructions for the remaining priests, starting in verse 12. Moses speaks to Aaron, to his surviving sons, to Eleazar and Ithamar. Take the grain offering that is left over from the Lord's offering by fire and eat it unleavened beside the altar, for it is most holy. Do you see that the theme of this chapter is about holiness and about if we're going to be there in the presence of God and engaged in his service, then we've got to do it in a holy way. We've got to treat it as holy. You shall eat it, moreover, in the holy place, because it is your due and your son's due out of the Lord's offering by fire, for thus I have been commanded. Going to go through 15. The breast of the wave offering, however, and the thigh of the offering you may eat in a clean place, you and your sons and your daughters with you. for they have been given as your due and your sons' due out of the sacrifices of the peace offerings, the sons of Israel. So the grain offering had to be eaten there in the tabernacle. The meat from this other offering could be brought home and shared with their family, but it still had to be offered, it had to be consumed where? In a clean place, not an unclean place. Because the people of God don't belong in an unclean place. The thigh offered by lifting up, and the breast offered by waving, they shall bring along with the offerings by fire of the portions of fat to present as a wave offering before the Lord, so that it shall be a thing perpetually for you, for your sons with you, just as the Lord has commanded. So, despite this judgment that has come upon these two priests for their unholy treatment of holy things, God's sacrificial order continues. He's saying here, you remember, this is what I told you to do with this, and this is what I told you to do with this, and this is how I told you to handle this. You keep on doing that. You do that. Your children do that perpetually. Y'all do this. Holiness doesn't abolish fellowship. Holiness preserves fellowship. So be holy. Now, by the way, God actually says that. Be ye holy, for I am holy. By the way, can we do that? Okay, that's a good qualified answer. Since how I have already sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, I can't make myself holy again. God has to do that. But can I then treat holy things as holy and behave in a holy way? And the answer is yes. It's a fine line that we walk between recognizing that we make mistakes in sin and recognizing that we don't have to make mistakes in sin. And a lot of brethren aren't real good at that fine line. They either want to insist that we could get to the point that we never sin and don't have to worry about it anymore, or they believe that we are hopelessly engaged in sin and just are going to be saved because God is such a nice guy. And as a result, they're not motivated to worry about holiness because God's a really nice guy and he's going to save us. I'm a Christian, so I'm going to be saved. Did that work for the priest? I'm a priest, so I'm going to be saved? No. And instead, he says to them, you do this the way I told you to do it. You obey my commands and you will stay holy. Now, if they became unclean, he hadn't done this yet, but if they became unclean, did he have a process for them to be cleansed? Yes. But the principle that's established at the beginning is, I've made you holy, now stay holy. And if you don't, you'll die. And then later on, he's going to say, if you get unclean like this, then you do this, and you'll be. He's already kind of dealt with the sin thing by saying what? If you sin, you got to come bring this offering, this sin offering that's specifically for this purpose. By the way, as a collective, the whole nation, once a year, what happened? There's this big sin offering that's offered for the people, and an atonement offering that's made for the people. They were constantly being reminded about what God was doing to address sin and to clean them and make them whole again. But in the meantime, they aren't to say, well, God's doing all this for us, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. We can live however we want to. He said, no, no, no. You do this the way I've told you to do it, and you honor me, and you keep things holy. If you want to preserve your fellowship with me, then you walk in the light as I am in the light, and you will have fellowship with me. 16 through 20, the issue of sin offering and Aaron's, I guess, explanation. Moses searched carefully for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it had been burned up. So he was angry with Aaron's surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, saying, "Why did you not eat the sin offering at the holy place? For it is most holy, and he gave it to you to bear away the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Behold, since its blood had not been brought inside into the sanctuary, you should certainly have eaten it in the sanctuary, just as I commanded." But Aaron spoke to Moses, "Behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. When things like these happened to me, if I had eaten a sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of the Lord?" And when Moses heard it, seemed good in his sight. This is a somewhat complicated exchange here, but Moses inquires about the goat of the sin offering and asks, "Why is it all burned up and why didn't you eat it?" And he rebukes the sons of Aaron. And then Aaron comes in and says, "Hey, these things have happened to me. Stuff like this has happened to me. And if I'd eaten the sin offering today, would it have been acceptable in the sight of the Lord?" And I think what he's saying here would it have been proper for me to do it? And Moses says, "Well, no, I don't guess it would have been." So obedience is not mechanical. And commandments aren't just commandments. They have a purpose. And we have to be concerned about the purpose as well. And so Aaron reasons from the purpose of the sin offering and the circumstances of grief and of judgment and all that's going on. And the text shows that there is some discernment that we have to use within God's law, not against God's law, but within God's law. We have to make some choices. The best example that I can come up with in my own head is this. When Jesus was teaching, at one point he said, "If you go to the altar to offer your sacrifice to God and you have aught against your brother." So here's a scenario. You are approaching God to offer a sacrifice to God, but you are at odds. Let's see, Leo and I are just angry with each other. We have a beef between us, and God says, "Stop. Don't offer anything to me. First, go to your brother and be reconciled to your brother, and then come back and make your offering." That's discernment within. Now, what I could say is, "Hey, my relationship with God is more important than my relationship with Leo, so I'm going to do this, and I'll deal with Leo later." God says, "No, no, no. You can't approach me if you're not living right and you don't have things ordered in your life. Go address that problem, get things right, and then you can come before me." That all is explained even more later on in 1 John, where we're told that you can't love God and not love your brother who's been created in his image. So I can't really be right with God and not have at least tried to work out my problems with my brother. That doesn't diminish the importance of service to God. That elevates the importance of relationship with one another. And we have to think about it in those ways. All right. I'll probably just do a recap before in the introduction period next week, and then we'll start in chapter 11 next Wednesday night, Lord willing.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of